German pilots once mocked the Tuskegee Airmen, black Americans flying fighters against the Luftwaffe. They mocked the notion that men who couldn't eat beside their white comrades could ever stand beside them in combat. To them, the Tuskegee Airmen were a curiosity, a failed experiment before it ever took off. They were wrong. From the deserts of North Africa to the high, cold skies over Berlin, these men would write a chapter that history almost forgot. The story of the first black fighter pilots in the United States Army Air Forces. Trained under the burning Alabama sun at a base built to test their limits, 992 earned their wings. Nearly half would go to war. They began in worn P-40 Warhawks, outdated, outmatched, and outnumbered, and finished in the sleek, red-tailed P-51 Mustangs that cut through the clouds like brushstrokes of fire. To the bomber crews who watched over their shoulders, those red tails meant one thing: survival. Again and again, the stories came back the same. When the red tails flew with us, we came home. In more than 1,500 escort missions, across thousands of hours in hostile skies, they fought Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs, and even the new German jets that promised to turn the tide. But no miracle weapon could break their discipline. No prejudice could break their resolve. At home, they were segregated, doubted, and dismissed. Abroad, they faced the most seasoned pilots in the world, veterans of every front of Hitler's war. And yet, it was in that crucible of fire and disbelief that the Tuskegee Airmen forged their legend. When a bomber crew at 25,000 feet saw a red tail holding formation beside them, they didn't see color, they saw hope. This is not just a war story. It is the story of courage that shattered barriers, of discipline that turned mockery into respect, and of a record so unbreakable that it reshaped both the air war over Europe and the conscience of America, long after the guns went silent. Summer of 1941. In the deep heat of Alabama, the air shimmered above the red clay runways of Tuskegee Army Airfield. Engines coughed, sputtered, then roared to life beneath a punishing southern sun. What began there was called an experiment, a segregated training program meant to test a theory that many in Washington already believed, that black men lacked the discipline, intelligence, and nerve to fly combat aircraft. To the generals, it was a gamble. To the men who gathered there, it was a promise. They came from New York, Chicago, and rural Georgia. Teachers, mechanics, sons of farmers, and Pullman porters. Each man had volunteered to do something no black American had done before, earn the silver wings of a U.S. Army pilot. They drilled from dawn to dusk, soaked in sweat and motor oil, learning to master machines that had never been built for them. Every flight hour was shadowed by doubt. Every lesson a test, not just of skill, but of belonging. Their commander was Captain Benjamin Oliver Davis, Jr., son of the first black general in the U.S. Army, a man shaped by silence. At West Point, no cadet had spoken to him for 4 years. He ate every meal alone, studied alone, marched alone, and graduated in the top third of his class. That same cold resolve now steadied the young men at Tuskegee. By the time the first group received their wings, 1942 was burning across the world. The Luftwaffe dominated the skies of Europe. Japan ruled the Pacific. The U.S. Army Air Forces needed pilots, but not everyone agreed these pilots should be allowed to fight. Newspapers called them the colored flyers. In the mess halls of white officers, the term experiment hung like a question mark. Mechanics refused to work beside them. Even their aircraft, P-40 Warhawks, rugged but obsolete, seemed a cruel metaphor for what the country thought of their chances. But they trained anyway. When their orders came for overseas deployment, they packed their gear in silence. The 99th Fighter Squadron, the first of its kind, shipped out to North Africa. Their destination, the desert war against the Afrika Korps and the Luftwaffe. They were young, some barely 20. Few had more than 400 flight hours in their logbooks. But they had discipline, a kind of discipline born from humiliation, from being told all your life you were unfit, and deciding to prove otherwise. In the spring of 1943, the 99th flew its first missions over Pantelleria and Sicily. The P-40s climbed hard but slow, their Allison engines screaming against the Mediterranean heat. Above them, German Messerschmitts cut through the sun like razors. Veterans of France, Britain, and Russia, pilots with hundreds of kills to their names. The first dogfights were brutal. The P-40s were outgunned and outclimbed. Reports from Allied commanders were blunt. Lack of aggressiveness. Unfit for sustained combat. The whispers returned. The experiment was failing. But numbers told another story. On July 6, 1643, Lieutenant Charles Shelby Hall of Indiana pressed the trigger of his P-40 at 20,000 feet above Pantelleria. His gun spat fire, and a German Bf-109 spiraled down in smoke, the first confirmed kill by a Tuskegee pilot. One victory, small, but it cracked the laughter. As the months passed, more names joined the tally. The 99th flew over 200 sorties, claimed a dozen enemy aircraft, and learned to fight with a precision the Luftwaffe had not expected. They had found their rhythm, tight formation, perfect coordination, never chasing kills, never abandoning the bombers they escorted. It was a quiet revolution. Still, prejudice clung like oil. White bomber crews groaned when they heard who would be flying cover. Rumors spread that the colored squadron couldn't keep up. But in the Mediterranean sun, Benjamin Davis's doctrine took root. He told his men again and again, "Stay with the bombers. Your job is to bring them home." While others chased glory, the Tuskegee men held formation, tight, disciplined, unbreakable. And slowly, the results began to speak louder than the color of their skin. By winter, the laughter had faded. The Luftwaffe pilots who once mocked them now filed combat reports noting Negro units displaying unusual cohesion. The experiment, as Washington had called it, was turning into something else, a legend in the making. The year ahead would test them as no flight school ever could. New aircraft, new missions, new enemies. And soon, the red tails of their Mustangs would paint the skies of Europe in a color that no one would ever forget. Winter of 1943 bled into spring, and the men of Tuskegee carried their battered P-40 Warhawks north from the deserts of Tunisia into Italy's mountainous spine. The air war there was unforgiving. Flak blossomed black against the sky, and the Luftwaffe fought with the desperation of men defending home soil. For the 99th Fighter Squadron, this was no longer an experiment. It was survival. Each mission stretched their endurance, 5-6 hours in thin air, where oxygen masks frosted over and sweat froze inside gloves. They flew escort for bombers headed toward Anzio, Monte Cassino, and the rail yards of Rome. On paper, they were still second-class soldiers. In the air, they were all that stood between the bombers and annihilation. The Warhawk was rugged but outclassed. Its Allison V-12 engine could barely reach 360 miles per hour, while the Messerschmitt Bf-109 Gustav that hunted them climbed faster, dove steeper, and carried heavier cannon. Every dogfight was unequal, a contest of grit against engineering. Yet time and again, discipline bridged the gap. When the 99th tangled with German fighters near Anzio in early 1944, they held their line. No one broke formation, even when flak tore through their ranks. Afterward, bomber crews sent quiet notes of thanks through channels. The colored boys stuck with us. But prejudice still hung in the air. At Allied headquarters, some commanders whispered that the squadron lacked aggressiveness. Reports used words like timid, cautious, hesitant, ignoring the fact that Davis's doctrine had saved bombers again and again. Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. flew to Washington to defend his men. He carried their records in his hand, mission counts, escort statistics, kill confirmations. Before the generals who doubted him, he spoke without anger. "Judge us by results," he said, "not by color." His logic was impossible to refute. The 99th had flown more than 200 missions, destroyed or damaged scores of enemy aircraft, and maintained loss rates below the theater average. Washington relented, and the experiment was allowed to continue. Then, a turning point. In the spring of 1944, 4 squadrons, the 99th, 100th, 301st, and 302nd, were merged to form the 302nd Fighter Group under Davis's command. Their new base was Ramitelli, a broad, wind-scoured airfield on Italy's Adriatic coast. With new command came new machines. The P-51 Mustang. Sleek, long-legged, and fast, the Mustang was everything the P-40 was not. Its Packard-built Rolls-Royce Merlin engine could push it past 400 miles per hour and climb to altitudes the Luftwaffe could not easily reach. It was the aircraft the bomber crews had been praying for. When the men of the 332nd painted the tails of their Mustangs crimson red for identification, a symbol was born. Against the pale blue of the Italian sky, those red tails blazed like banners of defiance. By June, the red tails were flying deep escort missions over Austria, Czechoslovakia, and Romania. Their orders were the same: protect the bombers. No chasing kills, no breaking formation. On July 24, 1944, hundreds of B-24s droned toward the oil refineries of Ploiești, prime targets for the Luftwaffe. German fighters descended in waves, Bf-109s and Fw-190s diving with cannon flashing. But this time, the Crimson Tail Mustangs were waiting. Captain Clarence Lucky Lester led his flight straight into the attack. In a few furious minutes, he shot down 3 German fighters. Others followed: Tops, Archer, Gilliard, cutting through the enemy formation with surgical precision. The bombers dropped their loads, the refineries burned, and the bombers came home largely untouched. In mess halls across Italy, the talk changed overnight. Crews who once groaned when told they'd be escorted by colored pilots now requested them by name. Chalked on the sides of bombers were new words: "Give us the red tails." Between June and December 1944, the 332nd flew more than 200 escort missions. Their bomber loss rate was among the lowest in the entire 15th Air Force. The very discipline mocked, as cowardice had become the gold standard for survival. Even the Germans took notice. Luftwaffe intelligence reports began warning of Negro pilots in red-tailed Mustangs who fight with unusual cohesion. What had begun as ridicule was now recorded as a tactical threat. The skies of Europe were changing. The Luftwaffe was bleeding to death, but not quietly. From the Reich's shattered factories came a new terror: the jet-powered Messerschmitt May 262, faster than any propeller plane on Earth. And soon, it would be the Red Tails' turn to face it. Winter of 1944. Germany was collapsing, but the skies above it were still deadly. The Red Tails had become legends among bomber crews, ghostly guardians who appeared at 25,000 feet and left no bomber behind. But the Luftwaffe had one last card to play: the Messerschmitt Me 262, the world's first operational jet fighter. The rumors spread through the 15th Air Force like static. Pilots spoke of silver streaks cutting through bomber streams faster than anything they'd ever seen, of cannon bursts that shredded B-17s in seconds. The Germans called it Der Sturmvogel, the storm bird. It was sleek, brutal, and, if the Reich's engineers were right, unstoppable. Colonel Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. studied the reports without expression. His orders were clear: the 332nd Fighter Group would escort the bombers on the next mission to Berlin, the heart of the enemy, the center of their dying empire. March 24, 1945. The morning air over Ramitelli was sharp with the scent of oil and frost. Mechanics worked by lamplight, tightening cowling bolts, checking ammunition belts, wiping down the crimson tails until they gleamed like fresh blood. The pilots suited up in silence. Davis moved among them, calm, deliberate, the way a steady hand moves over a map before battle. Today, he told them, we go to Berlin, stay with the bombers, that's how we win. They took off before dawn, 51 Mustangs climbing in this tight formation, engines humming in perfect rhythm. Below them, hundreds of bombers droned northward, a moving fortress of silver and smoke. As they crossed the Alps, sunlight spilled across the wings like fire. Hours later, over central Germany, the radio crackled. Bandits 12 o'clock high. Jets! The call hit every cockpit at once. A heartbeat later, they saw them, gray shapes slashing through the bomber stream, too fast to track. Me 262s, twin engines screaming, cannon fire flashing like strobe lights. One bomber vanished in a bloom of fire. Another fell, wings breaking apart as the crew bailed out into nothing. For a moment, the sky seemed lost. Then Davis's voice cut through the chaos. Stay with the bombers. Watch the climb and dive. Hit them when they slow. Captain Roscoe Brown spotted one jet banking hard through contrails. He dove, throttle wide open, Mustang shuddering under strain. The German tried to pull away, but Brown anticipated the turn, led his shots by instinct, and fired. The tracers stitched across the jet's tail. The Me-262 erupted in orange flame and fell spinning into the haze below. "It's Splash 1 jet," he radioed, calm, precise. Nearby, Captain Earl Lane caught another 262 as it lined up for a second attack. He rolled, cut the corner, and fired 2 short bursts. The jet burst apart in midair, its pieces glittering like broken glass. A third kill would come minutes later, Lieutenant Charles McGee catching a jet vulnerable on its climb. 3 of Hitler's wonder weapons destroyed in 10 minutes. The bombers pressed on, dropping their loads over Berlin's marshalling yards. Black smoke coiled upward, merging with the clouds. The Luftwaffe, out of fuel and out of faith, broke off. By the time the formation turned for home, the Red Tails had lost only 1 Mustang to flak. No bombers were lost to enemy fighters. When they landed back at Ramitelli after 7.5 hours in the air, the men climbed down from their cockpits dazed and silent. Oil streaked their flight suits. Powder smoke clung to their gloves. Davis met them on the runway, his expression unreadable. "Good work," he said. Nothing more. Word spread fast through the 15th Air Force. The Red Tails had faced Germany's most advanced aircraft and beaten it. In mess halls across Italy, bomber crews raised tin cups in their honor. One veteran of the 483rd Bomb Group said quietly, "If the Red Tails are up there, we live." For the Luftwaffe, it was the final humiliation. For America, it was proof. The men once dismissed as an experiment had become the finest escort group in Europe, and as the war in the air drew to a close, they had written their record in smoke and steel. 15,000 sorties, over 100 enemy aircraft destroyed, and a bomber loss rate so low it bordered on myth. The red-tailed Mustangs had not just won a war, they had changed the very meaning of who got to fight it. The war ended not with a roar, but with silence. When victory was declared in May of 1945, the fields at Ramitelli were quiet. The red-tailed Mustangs stood in neat rows, their engines cooling, their paint dulled by wind and sun. The men who had flown them sat on their wing roots or crouched beside oil drums, listening to the faint echo of radios from the operations tent. Germany has surrendered. 3 words, that was it. No one cheered, not yet. They had been fighting too long to celebrate easily. 15,000 sorties, more than 1,500 missions, 112 enemy aircraft confirmed destroyed, 27 bombers lost under their escort, when other units lost hundreds. It was a record no one could dispute, though many tried to ignore it. Colonel Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. walked the flight line that night. The Adriatic wind tugged at his coat as he looked out over the field that had been home for 2 long, punishing years. He thought of the men buried in Italian soil, of the telegrams sent home to mothers who still had to use colored entrances. "Good work," he said softly, the same words he always used. It was all he ever needed to say. They packed their duffel bags, stripped their Mustangs for spare parts, and left Italy behind. When the troop ships reached New York, the harbor was filled with banners, brass bands, and cheering crowds. But not for them. They disembarked quietly, walking down the gangplanks in formation, their uniforms crisp, their insignia bright. The signs in the terminal were the same as when they had left. White and colored. For many, the return was harder than the war. The airlines would not hire them. Civilian aviation schools turned them away. Men who had outflown jets over Berlin were told they lacked the temperament for commercial flying. The discipline that had made them heroes overseas made them invisible at home. Still, they endured. Charles McGee went back to school, later flying in Korea and Vietnam before retiring as a colonel. Roscoe Brown became an educator, teaching generations about a history too long ignored. Benjamin Davis stayed in the Air Force. When President Truman signed Executive Order 9981 in 1948, desegregating the military, Davis helped lead the transition. He would retire as a 4-star general, the first black man in the U.S. Air Force to hold that rank. Recognition came slowly. The headlines went to others. For years, the Tuskegee Airmen were a footnote in textbooks, their record buried under statistics. It was the bomber crews who refused to forget. "When we saw those red tails, we knew we were coming home," one veteran wrote in his memoir. Another scrawled it simpler. "They never left us." In the 1970s, historians began to dig deeper. In the 1980s, the first reunions drew crowds. By the time Congress awarded them the gold medal in 2007, the surviving pilots were old men, their hair white, their bearings still straight. Standing together, they looked like what they had always been, warriors who had fought 2 battles and won both. Davis was asked once what the Red Tails had proven. He paused before answering. "That excellence," he said, "is the greatest argument there is. Today, the fields of Ramitelli are overgrown. The runways have disappeared beneath grass and olive trees. But sometimes, on certain afternoons, the wind carries a faint echo, a low hum, like an engine idling far away. Farmers say it's nothing. But if you listen closely, you might hear them. The Mustangs climbing again into the thin blue over the Adriatic, their tails flashing crimson in the sun. They are still up there, somewhere beyond memory, flying in perfect formation. The sound of discipline, the color of defiance, the echo of men who were once mocked and who became immortal.